You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
All right, we're back for another ThunderQuack podcast quarantine zone for our second week of quarantine, and not going to be our last. I am, of course, your host, Michael Cohen, and with me tonight I've got my former current co-host. Technically, the two shows that we do are on hiatus. Yeah. They're not technically done. Formerly, we were doing the Pullbox podcast, and somewhat presently we're kind of doing Disney Dad's Cartoon Afternoon, although taking quite a long break. With me tonight is Kurtis Findlay.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here from the comfort of my house.
Yeah, well, we're all hopefully from the comfort of our homes. I obviously, we're all still quarantined. We're all still self-isolating, social distancing, whatever words you want to put on it. Lockdown, if you like. Those of us who are trapped with kids probably are inclined to say lockdown, because there is no escape. There is no escape. I only have the two to deal with, and one of them is not particularly mobile yet. Kurtis, how are you handling it? You've got older kids. How's that going?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's been a long week. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because, like, we're not hiding any of the information from our boys. We're telling them what's going on, and we're keeping them up to date. We want them to be aware of the situation so that they can manage themselves in terms of their own cleanliness and such. But also because this is an important part of world history. Like, this is a big deal, and I want them to remember that when this happened years from now, and have a knowledge of what's going on during the world at this time. And so, yeah, spring break. I was already expecting to have them home last week and this week because it's been spring break.
Yeah.
But it has been a long week because we haven't been able to go anywhere. Spring break, we would go outside, or we'd go to the library, or swimming, or whatever, right? And none of that can happen, and everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has been a week of just balancing the anxieties of what's going on in the world with the crankiness of being still.
Yeah.
And I have to draw that fine line between, like, well, it would just be fine. It would make my life easier if they were just watching TV all day.
Yeah.
But I can't bring myself to let them do that. Plus, it turns them into cranky monsters if they're watching TV all day as well. So it doesn't work to my benefit toward the end of the day anyway.
Yeah, it is definitely a balancing act. There's an element of it where I think the hardest part is not getting a break, right? Especially kids your age, like the age of yours. The two of them are off at school most of the time, right? Like, you're really only having to deal with them first thing in the morning and then in the evening, 5 days a week. So right now, having them, and like you said, we're supposed to be on spring break anyway, so maybe we all shouldn't be complaining just yet, because we were gonna have to deal with them anyways. But it's just it's the no escape, and it's the we're all stuck in the house together. Don't get a break, don't get away from them, and so you kind of have to find your moments where you can. I find that one of the hardest parts is probably that when we do have that time away from the kids when they're asleep, Thankfully, mine go to bed around 7:30, so that's not that big a deal. Crystal and I normally would spend time together, but instead we just kind of go off into separate parts of the house most nights at the moment, and just kind of have a little bit of alone time. I mean, I come in here and do this at 8:30 3 nights a week right now, but like last night, she just kind of went into the office, and I was in the living room playing Animal Crossing, and we spent most of the night separate, and then a little bit of time after 10 o'clock sitting in the same room together, not really talking, because it's just, it's a lot to be around people 24/7, and to not have that alone time. And like, I'm not a particularly introverted person. Obviously, I should hope that that's obvious to folks. But I do like time to collect my thoughts. Like, I do like time on my own to listen to a podcast, to process stuff, to work through things. And I can get really frustrated when there are too many people around. I guess kind of an intro extrovert, because like, I really like being around people so long as everybody shuts up and listens, which is why podcasting is such a great medium for me. But in real life, that happens a lot less. In real life, you have to be polite, and there has to be a give and take, and conversation goes both ways. But I do enjoy getting away from everybody and just kind of being able to do my own thing. That's obviously not happening right now, and that's it's a weird kind of paradox that I think most of us find ourselves in. Of, I really wish that I could just get away from people for 5 seconds, but also I'm incredibly lonely. Even though I'm in this house with my family, there is like a weird loneliness to it. So, I don't know. Crystal put on Boy Meets World earlier this afternoon, and we watched a couple of episodes of that as a family, and that was nice. It was enjoyable. Thank goodness for Disney Plus and Netflix and all of these different streaming platforms and access to the internet. So it's
we've been watching a lot of Mandalorian with the boys. We're going through that show, and
That's good.
Exactly. But and that brings me to kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. Mike has me on the show today because I said to him, hey, I got something I want to talk about on your podcast. Because I want to hear your thoughts about it too. Because it's an interesting subject, and I just don't know where the world is going with this. So it's the topic of just the way we consume media now during this isolation period, and how that's going to affect things moving forward. Because we're already seeing such a drastic change in just not even little things. It's like, the comic book shops have, like, we'll get into the nitty gritty about the way comics are going to run, because I've been following that quite closely, and the way movies are, the way live concerts are, it's all going to be different, I think, coming out of this. It's going to be very interesting to see if we go back to the way it was before, or if things just adapt, I guess. One of the things I want to start with is just the fact that on places like Instagram and Facebook and such, a lot of people are using the live stream function now a lot more frequently than they did before, just as a way to reach out to people. If you follow any sort of, like, even actor accounts or anything, they all do like really cool things. I was watching Natalie Portman cooking dinner this evening, and it's like, you can tell this, people are lonely, and especially actors are introverted. They love being in front of people, and so a lot of them are live streaming their lives, and it's like this could be a change if they get used to that, just that routine. And if people or fans or such come to expect that of people, then we could be seeing a lot more of this kind of thing more often and more frequently.
Yeah. 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 I think that there's a lot of elements of the entertainment industry that have been, like kind of stuck in the previous sort of thought process,
Yeah.
um and the sort of older distribution models, the older deals, and I it's not just the entertainment industry, it is every industry, it's every person. um Anytime you try and introduce change, it's but this is the way we've always done it and it's worked fine,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of like the human motto. And a situation like this, I think, puts everybody in a position where they have to adapt and find other means. I think what you're gonna see, because this is gonna go on for a while, that you're gonna see a bunch of podcasts sprout up.
Yeah.
Joel McHale and Ken Jeong are gonna be doing a podcast. It sounds like it's going to be called The Darkest Timeline, which I don't know if the podcast is specifically going to be about Community or if they'll just talk about Community amongst other things. But if they're going to, like, look, if Joel McHale and Ken Jeong are doing a Community podcast,
Yeah.
I'm not
Totally.
going to say the pandemic was worth it, but at least something great came out of it, right?
Right. Yeah.
You can't say that because people are dying. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not one of those Republicans who's currently saying like, "Hey, why don't we all just go back to work and see how bad it can really get?"
Oh man. Yeah.
Their short-sightedness is very, very upsetting, because it's like, do you guys realize that it's your constituents that are at the most risk, right? Like,
That's right.
it's not even a matter of like, hey, you guys are short-sighted because you're not thinking about the long term and how many, like, how deaths will affect the economy over the next 5 years as opposed to in the next 5 months. But like, you're not even thinking in the shorter long term of November, when you all want to be reelected, and if everybody over 60 is dead, I'm pretty sure the Democrats are going to win, right? Like, it's anyways, I don't want to get too much into the politics of that. That's something for Amanda and I to discuss. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's I don't know. I think that a lot of these distribution models, podcasting, YouTube, live streaming, Twitch, things that have been relegated to the younger generation, and that have been sort of scoffed at as like, oh yeah, you've got a podcast, right? Like, it's become a bit of a joke in the last few years. Everybody has a podcast, which is why I always say you're not a real podcaster until you have at least 3. But because anybody can start one podcast. That's no thank you. Until you have a network, you're not a real podcaster. But I think you're seeing a lot of people who maybe previously wouldn't have jumped into these mediums doing that. And I think for the better. I personally think that platforms, there are a lot of problems with YouTube. There are a lot of problems with sort of the model for podcasting at the moment. But the more people get into it, the more democratized it'll become, and sort of the better it is for everybody. It's the rising tide sort of thing, right? Like, if Joel McHale and Ken Jeong start a podcast, and if Zach Braff and Donald Faison start a podcast about, and they're both starting podcasts about their respective old canceled sitcoms, new people come into the medium, new people that might go looking for something else and find ThunderQuack or find the Epic Marvel Podcast or find all these other things that we're doing sort of in our corner of the internet. And that's a positive for everybody. If people are on YouTube and getting, comfortable with the platform and familiar with it, then when things start back up, original content on YouTube might be taken more seriously, right? So everybody who's kind of discovering stuff over on YouTube, they're recommending things, right? And one thing that I'm really upset that I haven't recommended until I'm about to right now is Cobra Kai. Now, you guys know I've talked about Cobra Kai on ThunderQuack a lot because I love that show, and I love the original Karate Kid film. But I stuff like that, it's not really been seen by that many people. But there's sort of an opportunity for that to get more of an audience as people sort of go through their Netflix queues and are looking for something else, and maybe go over to YouTube and check out something that somebody's doing over there, and then discover Cobra Kai or Good Game or any of the other YouTube originals that are over there. They're actually pretty good. YouTube's got a really solid lineup of about 4 or 5 shows that are worthwhile. They're definitely worth your time. Cobra Kai's got 2 seasons, and the 3rd season that I think was supposed to go into production pretty soon, but that's obviously going to be on hold. But yeah, I don't know. I think that for entertainment, it'll be a net positive, but I can see how other industries are going to get hit really hard by this. The comic book industry in particular. I think it's going to be difficult because that platform has not been democratized as much, right? They've kind of, there are gatekeepers with that, with Diamond comic distributors that like they got a pretty tight stranglehold on that, and that might actually have to go away. I don't think that it's ever been healthy for the comic industry for Diamond to be as to have as much of a monopoly as they do, because it's either Diamond or it's independent, and that's
before we get into
Yeah.
comic books though. Let's stick. Hold on. Let's go back. Let's backtrack a little bit, and I just want to stick with the Netflix thing for a second here. We have 2 major live entertainment streams, I think, that are being reshaped right now. The first is movies, of course, because movie theaters have been shut down, and so we are seeing the movie companies starting to put their first run movies direct to video on demand. And this is completely unprecedented, right? Only the B quality stuff goes to video on demand directly, right? But movie companies are like, well, we got to recoup our costs, and they have their schedules. Like, other movies are still going to come out, although productions have all stopped and stuff, so maybe everything will get pushed. But they're like, some of these movies that, like, let's say Onward, for instance, Pixar's Onward, was only in theaters for a week or 2 before the theaters shut down, and so now it's going to Disney. I can't remember if they said it's going to Disney Plus next week or if it's going to video on demand. It's
already on video on demand. They made the announcement, and I think the next day it was on video on demand. I'm pretty sure it's coming to Disney Plus on April 1st. So
yeah, and that's so real. Like, it's just and I wonder if people will prefer that or if they will not. Now, video on demand, it's still like, it's $20 and I don't know, do you rent it or do you buy it?
I'm pretty sure it's a rental. I'm pretty sure it's a rental.
Yeah.
That you're.
So some people are saying that's high. It's like, it's more than the cost of a movie ticket, and it's like you don't even get to see it on a big screen or whatever. For myself and my family of 5, where it costs over $50, well over $50 to go see a movie, it's a tremendous deal for video on demand to rent it for $20. Like, that's awesome.
And here's the thing: Trolls World Tour is coming out. it's not even going to the theater. It's just coming straight to on demand. And
Right.
here's something I want to float to you, Curtis. I haven't said this to you yet. I think what we should do is we should pick a night where we rent it in our house and you guys rent it at your house, and we set up Skype with the video,
Oh, yeah,
and
sure.
we watch it together. We just all watch it together, because then we'll
Totally.
get the same experience that we would have gotten if we had all gone to the theater together. And we can all
Yeah.
watch a
And
movie together.
that's the missing component, is
Yeah.
the communal aspect of it. Where, like, I know you go to see a movie with your girlfriend or with your family or whatever, and you're in a theater full of strangers, but you're all laughing together,
Yeah.
or you're all crying together or whatever, and that will definitely be missing if you keep watching it at home. But I just wonder if this whole if people really grab onto it with the video on demand, will movie companies start releasing movies just regularly video on demand along with the release in the theater at the same time,
Yeah.
if they find that it's actually making them some money?
Yeah, I did
Like,
end up talking about this a little bit last week with Joe on Wednesday, because this stuff was kind of all starting to hit. And I think that we could see a world where the release window for theaters is a lot shorter. Um,
yeah,
and I
it's
think
already pretty short.
it's already pretty short. It's 3 months is generally what it is at this point. It used to, man, it used to be more than a year for some movies to come to home
Yeah,
video back in the day.
yeah,
It
that's true.
was really a long time. Like the Phantom Menace, I can remember it was forever until that came out on VHS. And
Well,
then even
I
it
remember
didn't
the
even come
Disney
out on
movies, like,
DVD until later.
yeah,
So
Aladdin
yeah,
and Lion King and stuff. Those were all summer movies, and then you would have to wait till the next summer before it was on VHS. I distinctly remember pre-ordering those. Yeah, a full, and then movies just stayed in theaters for years. I mean,
yeah,
Titanic, months and months and months went by. Now you're lucky if you miss if you wait for like a month, you might not see a movie in the theater
yeah,
anymore. You might just miss
yeah.
it.
Well, I think, and one of the most interesting things for me about all of this is that the last two big movies to really come out before all of this happened, Onward just snuck in, but it didn't really get a long enough run to make an impact. Um, the two biggest movies before that one coming out were Birds of Prey,
Yeah.
which was not a huge box office smash. It did okay. It actually did all right. You can't listen to the spin that the media put on it. It did as well as a lot of other movies of its budget, that
Yep.
people would have considered hits. And it's a great film, which I believe Birds of Prey is now available for on demand rental, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. It's a great movie. But the other one was Sonic the Hedgehog,
Okay.
which by all accounts was not supposed to be good, was not supposed to be a hit. It was supposed to
Yeah.
be a massive flop, a huge disappointment, another, black eye on the IP that is Sonic the Hedgehog. And yet it's a great movie. It's a great family movie. It is such a good family movie. Like it hits all of
Yeah.
the right notes. It is also actually a really good. It is the best possible movie you could make with Sonic the Hedgehog. In reality, there's certainly a Sonic the Hedgehog movie that would be more serious and sort of take the subject matter a little bit more seriously and more mature, that for a little bit more of a teenage audience, that I would personally like to see one day. I don't think that we will. I think in reality, this is the best kind of Sonic the Hedgehog movie that we're likely to ever get. And if the sequel can meet that, I'll be really happy. Um, and it might end up being one of the biggest releases of the year as a result of all of this, because so many big tentpole movies have now been pushed to 2021 and or to potentially later this year But the problem is that the movie dates are picked years in advance, and the back half of the year is stacked too, right? Like
Yeah, that's
from
right.
September on, we've actually got a lot of movies coming out, and a lot of really big high profile ones. So, I Disney and Warner Brothers and Universal and such, like they are looking at it and going like, there's not room for us to release these movies in theaters this year. So the Fast and the Furious, I think, was one of the first ones. Fast 9 got pushed to next year, to April of next year, which is a real bummer because it was set to come out my birthday weekend. And I was really looking forward to that. But
Yeah, yeah.
but you know, I mean, like, and I'm happy. I'm glad to wait. I'm sure it'll still be as good next year as these things don't go sour on the vine, right? Like they're not topical, let's say. Um, but it's going to be really upsetting when Black Widow does eventually get pushed. I think it's just been delayed, right? Like they haven't really announced when it's going to end up coming out.
Well, they
Thankfully,
can't. We don't know how long this is going on for.
thankfully Black Widow uh doesn't affect the timeline moving forward for Marvel, right? Like I think that the Eternals, which is set to come out in November, is going to be the beginning of sort of the next phase, right? It's very similar to like when we went
Right.
from
Yeah.
phase 1 to phase 2. At the beginning of phase 2, we got Iron Man 3, which was very much like Avengers happened. Let's check back in with Tony Stark and see how he handled that, being that he's the character that we started all of this with. And then later that summer, I think we got Guardians of the Galaxy, right? And that is like, okay, that pushes us into phase 2, and it's like, okay, phase 2 is going to be crazy. It's going to be different. Eternals, I think, will be the same for what is this, phase 3 or 4? I've completely lost count with the MCU movies.
4.
This is phase 4,
We're
right?
in 4 now, I
Yeah.
think.
So
Yeah.
like, I think
Yeah.
Black Widow was meant to sort of be an epilogue, because it technically takes place between Infinity War and Civil War, or Civil War and Infinity War, more accurately. So it was going to be a little bit more of a like, hey, let's fill in some and check in with a character and give her a nice send off. And then Eternals is going to be the one that's like, hey, here's the new status quo post Endgame. This is our next movie that sort of takes place there. Although I guess Spider-Man already did that, but yeah, like
Kind of.
so they can kind of suspend that one for several months, and I don't think it'll matter. It can come out after Eternals, but the thing I'm more worried about right now is like Shang-Chi. I don't think has shot yet, right? But it's supposed to come out next spring, and I'm sure that they were planning to film it this summer and do post the next like 6 months after that, and release it in I think it was supposed to be February.
Yeah.
Shang-Chi I'm super excited about. That's probably the one on the new slate that I'm the most excited about. Like, who knows what's going to happen with that when it's going to actually end up coming out. And will any movies end up actually getting canceled? I don't know if any MCU movies can, right? Because the MCU is it's so strategically developed, and it's like, it's the one thing that they've done so well. It's the thing that everybody else should be taking notes on, that Star Wars should have done, that
It
DC
really
should
depends
be
on the
doing.
movies, though,
It does because
because they had the whole sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
They have had to switch around though, like Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther and Guardians 3, I think, all because they had directorial issues or something. They all switched spots. So some of them are interchangeable in their placement in the actual timeline. Some of them are not. Shang-Chi probably is. You could probably move that one back or forwards, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I guess. I mean, I don't know because I haven't seen the movie, so I can't really say for sure. But there probably is some wiggle room.
Yeah. we'll see, right? It's gonna be what it's gonna be. There are more important things than Marvel movies. It's hard to believe that I said that,
Yeah.
but at the moment there are much more important things, and everybody's health and safety is obviously priority one, and
Oh, of course.
it is not worth it to go back to work if it means putting lives at risk. Man, some of the stuff that I have seen in the last 48 hours coming out of America has been very, very upsetting, and like it always
Yeah,
is, we
I think
know.
you can't take any of that at face value because it's just they're just talking. A lot
Yeah,
of them are just scared and don't know what to say either,
yeah.
and they just say whatever comes out of their mouth, and it's dumb a lot of the time. So,
Yeah. Oh God. Especially
um,
the person who's supposed to be their leader. It's that's the most disconcerting thing. Coronavirus couldn't have waited until next year when there was a real actual adult in the White House. But hopefully, I mean, I
well, and you know that this is the thing that's going to define his presidency. Is like,
yeah.
look what I accomplished. I got my country through this whole thing
Yeah.
because a great president.
Did he get his country through it?
Oh,
Because currently America has jumped up the ranking and now has the third highest uh, uh, number of confirmed cases in the world. And
well, because their
China,
population is huge.
yeah, China had a 2 month head start on them, and Italy had at least 3 weeks, if not longer. Um,
Yeah.
and they've blown
Well,
past.
yeah.
So it's it's a I don't know. We don't need to get into all that. Um, comic books.
Okay. Well,
Let's talk about comics.
let's loop it around. Well, I still want to have one more
Okay.
thing before we get into comic books because that'll be a bigger conversation here. Is that I want to talk about live concerts. Music, I think, just the live show is also going to be changed because we've already seen so many musicians having to cancel their tours across the country, across the world, and instead are doing live streaming concerts. And
Hmm.
while that's not ideal, like there's nothing like seeing a live performance for sure. There are so many places in the world that the tour doesn't go anywhere near. And people for Canada, it's like if you don't live in Vancouver or Toronto or maybe Calgary, then you're out of luck. The tours never go anywhere else in the country. And so the fact that they are live streaming their show with all the bells and whistles opens up the fan base to experience something that they would not normally get to.
I'm not really a live show kind of guy. Like music isn't really my thing, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference to me one way or another. But I know that people who that is important to, it's very important. Um,
Yeah,
but but
and I
I
think that there's definitely.
yeah, I might actually be interested in watching a live stream of a concert more than actually being there. I don't know. I don't necessarily want to be crowded into a venue or be uh 10,000 feet away from the performer.
Well, yeah,
Um,
there are definitely pros. Like if I want my kids to go to see a band and like they're short, so if everyone is standing, they're not going to see anything, or it's like I don't want them to blow their eardrums out, or you do get a better experience. Like you said, you're not 10,000 rows back. You can be right up in their faces, and they'll have nice cameras that are focusing on all the action. And um, you do need to experience a live concert at least once in your life, but to have that available, to have that option, um, it benefits the bands because they're just making more money,
mhm.
and it just helps people who want to be a part of that community or that part of that fandom be a part of it.
Yeah, I think more options is always going to be better. No, that's just kind of my opinion. It's like with the movie thing. If a movie comes out in the theater, but it also comes out on demand, like let's say there's a 2 week window where it's in the theater, but then it's going to be on demand. and it'll be in the theater and on demand at the same time. If I have the choice, that's to me as a consumer only a good thing, because there are some movies that I definitely want to go to the theater for. A Marvel movie, a Star Wars movie, Fast and the Furious stuff, like anything with Tom Cruise in it. Generally, like I want to go to see it on the big screen and have that experience.
Yeah.
But then there are other movies like, let's say, like Jojo Rabbit, which I still haven't seen yet, which I really need to get around to. I think it might be on demand now. That like, yeah, I don't necessarily want to go to the theater to see that. I like, if there was an opportunity to, I would. But like, I don't know. I actually personally find that Taika Waititi movies are with Thor Ragnarok, I think, being the exception, are they're actually better in a private setting where you can kind of just take it in on your own. I don't know. That's what I found with his stuff. So, like, there are certain filmmakers or certain types of films that I'm much more inclined to sort of like cozy up on the couch, generally even by myself, and enjoy. So like I said, that's where choice is way more important to me. Let's say Taylor Swift. I am not a big enough Taylor Swift fan to brave the crowd that's going to be at a Taylor Swift concert. That said,
Right.
I like Taylor Swift quite a bit, and so does Crystal, and so does Cara, and I'm sure that Cassie will, and I'm totally down to live stream a Taylor Swift concert. So, it's sort of, it's all over the place. I think it can be. It could be either or, and I hope that now that the technology is there, that people take advantage of it.
Okay, I think we can segue into comics now if you want. We have in Vancouver, we're very fortunate that we have, I don't know, 7 or 8 really good comic book stores, and they're all, but there have been so many that have closed down over the last 10 years. I think I made a list of them at one point on Facebook. I was trying to come up with all of the comic book stores in the greater Vancouver area that I used to frequent over the past 15 years. And I think maybe there's a list of about 12 or so that have shut down. The ones that are still standing are doing okay, but the comic book industry is already sort of on edge of like the comic book stores just don't have the customer base to support the rising cost of rent and minimum wage and all those other kind of stuff, and also the comics themselves, because comic book stores have to actually physically buy all of their stuff that they're putting in their store. They can't send it. There's no consignment or anything like that. So they needed more overhead, and a lot of them just don't see the amount of people coming in. So when we have something like this, where all of a sudden they're not allowed to sell, what's going to happen to these comic book stores? And this goes for any sort of small business, mom and pop shop, small restaurants, local, boutique kind of stores. They're all in the same boat. And thankfully, our Canadian government is now stepping in to help them out and declaring things like holds on rents and all this kind of stuff, which is fantastic. But what's going to, the employees aren't getting paid, and like this is a big deal. So I the other day I spent $50 at Metropolis Comics that I normally probably wouldn't spend. Just because I feel bad for them and I want them to survive, so I'll buy some stuff from them.
Yeah.
They're doing a great delivery service right now where they'll actually bring you your comics. And there's no contact. You don't have to venture out and everything. And it's very cool. And I want them to survive. So I'll try and do that over the next few months or several months or however long it takes for all of the comic book stores because, I'm friends with all of them.
Yeah.
Except Golden Age Downtown. I don't really know those guys very well.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it is a weird it's kind of a weird catch 22 for them to be in, for comic shops to be in, because they do, and this is before all of this happened. They were in a bad spot anyways, because like you said, they have to physically bring that content in, and in a lot of cases sit on it when it doesn't sell as many issues as they expect, or more frequently than not, unfortunately, people who said that they were going to buy something, right, who have basically agreed to a subscription for a specific comic, they don't end up coming in and picking up those comics. And sometimes
yeah,
it can be 6 months before you realize this person's never coming back in.
yeah,
And by that time, at 10 titles a month for 6 months, right? Like you got a lot of comics sitting there. That's a lot of inventory that now all of a sudden you're putting on your shelf, and they're old comics, and old comics are old, and a lot of people are switching to the digital model, and that's also hurting things. It's to me it's actually, it's sad, because obviously we love the medium of comic books.
yeah,
But I think that unfortunately the model for comic books and the way that they've been sold is not sustainable. It's just it's managed to stay alive for this long, and I'm glad that it has, but at a certain point the industry has to pivot. They have to change, or it's going to die. It is, like, because
yeah,
without the retailers, how do you get your audience, I think the biggest thing for me that gets underappreciated with the comic shop itself as an institution are the employees within the comic shop. Because when you walk in and you go, hey, I like Superman, what should I read, they're there to tell you. And
yes,
how often do we go on Netflix and you just kind of flip through the things, and it's suggesting things to you, and there's algorithms and stuff like that. The comics industry isn't doing that with any of their apps, really. And if
right.
they are, it's not great. Marvel Unlimited is not great at recommending things. It's kind of just like,
No, it's just algorithms. Oh, you like Doctor Strange? Here's other Doctor Strange
yeah,
things, but it's like,
you like new comics, here's more new comics. um and
yeah,
I don't know, I honestly think one of the things that needs to happen is that the stranglehold that the big two have on the industry needs to kind of release a little bit, and independent comics need to become a more prominent thing. I don't know how that happens, but they run the show. Marvel and DC run the show. What they do, everybody else has to do, because Diamond listens to them, because they move the most product.
yeah.
Um, but
Well, we're only talking though about like the single issue subscription superhero kind of
yeah,
world. We're talking about Marvel, DC, Image, but comics is more popular this year, like in these past few years, than it has been since the 90s. Like comics have grown to an incredibly popular and lucrative business, but
mm-hmm.
it's not Marvel and DC. It's not in the comic shops. Did you know that in, I think it was 2018, 18%, and that's of all comics sold. This is a pretty big number. 18% of all comics sold were the six Dogman books from
uh,
Scholastic.
from
Like that's
Scholastic.
yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
it's absolutely nuts. Comics is not a dying form at
Yeah.
all. It's just evolving to the bookstores.
That's actually what I was gonna say. That's the direction that it needs to go, right?
Yeah.
I don't want single issues of Spider-Man. I don't want single issues of Superman. I want you to tell me a story from front to back.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it's in continuity or not. I don't care if it's part of an ongoing thing that's been running for 60 years. That, to be honest, for the most part, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Right? Like having to hold that continuity in my head, and like X-Men. I love the X-Men, right? As a concept, I love the animated series. I love the some of the movies, a handful of the movies, maybe 2 or 3 of the movies. But ongoing X-Men comics are awful. And they're not awful because they're poorly written or the art is bad or any of that. They're awful because in order to read one X-Men book, you have to be reading 6 X-Men books.
Right.
Because no matter what, okay, 4 issues of this, that's a story. Okay, another 6 issues of X-Force, that's another story. And then you get into the 11th issue and all of a sudden, wait, what? Who's this guy? What does this have to do with any... Oh, they're all
You missed
crossing
out on
over into
Excalibur
one
or whatever.
story.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not reading X-Men. I'm not reading Uncanny X-Men. I'm not reading the Astonishing X-Men. I'm not reading Cyclops. I'm not reading the all-new X-Men.
It's so expensive.
Yeah, like so you know what? If somebody was like, "Hey, we're going to put out like let's say I don't know, Brian K. Vaughan was like, "Hey, I got an awesome X-Men story that I want to tell, and it's gonna be over 6 volumes, and each one of those is gonna be about 6 issues, and we're gonna put them out over the course of the next 3 years." I would be like, "Yeah, I'm down. Put out your trade paperbacks. I will buy every volume."
Yep.
And
Yep,
is it
that's
part of the
totally,
continuity?
yeah.
It doesn't matter. Is it one continuous story from start to finish involving his vision of the X-Men? That's what I care about. Put a great artist on it, give them the amount of time that it takes in order to put that together, and then release them as they're ready. Don't switch artists halfway through. Don't bring in another writer to write an issue because we're falling behind. They come out when they come out. And I'm down for that. That's the model that it needs to turn into. And I've been saying that probably for about 3 or 4 years because I hate the monthly issue, but unfortunately it's what Marvel and DC butter their bread with, and it is a really important part of cash flow for comic book stores. Yeah. But something has to push that industry into a new model. And maybe this will be it, but I don't know if it will be because I don't know if a lot of these stores are going to be able to weather this.
So the thing though is that if a lot of the stores don't weather this, let's say that 20, especially if this goes on for like 6 months, yeah. Which, you know, who knows, it might. I sure hope not, but. Let's say 25% of all comic shops close down.
Yeah.
And that means that there are, you know, that's 25% like a loss of their market because it's the comic shops that are buying their comics. It's not people that are buying comics. It's comic shops that are buying comics. So if the comic shops all of a sudden are not buying comics, and Tom DeFalco always. He was the editor-in-chief for Marvel through the 90s, and in an interview with him, he was telling me he had this great analogy. It's like, let's say you spend your money on 5 Spider-Man comics a month, okay, and you have some, and then they cancel one of the comics. They cancel even 2 of the comics. Let's say you're not going to all of a sudden pick up Captain America and Wolverine. Because 2 of the Spider-Man comics have been canceled, you're going to go out for pizza. It's just not the way it works. Mm-hmm. So if a person is collecting comics, and then all of a sudden their comic shop, the only one in the area, goes down, they're not going to bother trying to figure out a way to buy more comics. Most people are probably just going to stop. And even if my Saberbox at Eighth Dimension Comics is, if they go under and I don't, and they cancel all the titles that they pull for me, I might renew one or two of them at another store, but this will be my out for a lot of ones that I was just kind of about. It's going to lessen the amount of people that are buying comics in the single issue installment, I think, regardless of whether the comic shops fold or not. Especially since a lot of people they're losing their jobs as well. People out there are losing their jobs because their businesses are closing down for so long. So they don't have the cash flow and the disposable income through this time to keep buying comics through this period. So they might stop. And when it starts up again, will they continue? Maybe not. Or they'll come back in only buy maybe one or two a month or something instead of 7 or 8 or whatever. And then if all of these comic shops close down, the bookstores and the places where graphic novels are sold, especially the big chains, they're still around. Those are the ones who are still ordering stuff from Marvel and DC, but they don't order the single issues. So Marvel and DC will have to address this thing as like, well, our single issue comic book industry took a huge hit, but the graphic novel industry is still fine because there are so many other avenues. There's online avenues, Amazon and all of that. But those places don't deal with the single issues. So I think we may see a natural progression toward that, gravitating toward that. I also pay attention to the sales of graphic novels. I don't pay attention to the sales of single issues, so I don't know how those do. But a standard, let's say the most popular graphic novels, the collections, when they collect the single issues, for instance, Immortal is one of the most popular titles that Marvel has right now. When they release one of those trades, it sells about 2,000 units in its first month. That's to the direct market, to the comic book stores. That's not counting Amazon. That's not counting Barnes and Noble or Indigo or whatever. It's only to the comic shops. That's not a huge number. 2,000 units. House of X, Powers of X, arguably the biggest event in X-Men history in the past 10 years, sold about 10,000 units in its first month. And that was a huge shock that something sold that much. But that's the difference between Immortal Hulk and X-Men from 2,000 to 10,000. Whereas Dogman is selling like literal millions of copies.
Yeah.
In through Scholastic and through the bookstores and such. Marvel and DC, all of these publishers are focusing on the wrong place. Yeah. There's money to be made outside of the direct market, and they really need to take advantage of that, and they'll do better.
Yeah. Oh, I think you dropped out there. You still there, Kurtis?
Yeah, still here. Yeah. So I think comic book stores hopefully will survive, but will people come back to it? I don't know.
I think there are different varieties of comic book stores as well. I think for a guy like Johnny who runs Metropolis Comics here in Vancouver, in Burnaby technically, Johnny is pretty diversified. He does have other revenue streams, not just comic books. So
because he knows that he can't do it on comic books alone. He's had to do that because that it's not a sustainable model anymore.
Yeah. So he's also got model kits, specifically a lot of the Gundam and Bandai hobby kits and that sort of thing, and action figures and collectibles
and the gaming cards
and the gaming stuff as well. And I think that what we'll see is the shops that have diversified a little bit more will be able to weather the storm. It's honestly, we saw this with video games probably about 6 or 7 years ago. start to happen because of digital distribution, right? When the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 started selling games online instead of you having to go into a store to pick them up, and even more so, that started to kill the aftermarket aspect of the industry. You saw a lot of game shops close up, and I because people just they're either buying brand new games digitally, or they're going to one of the big stores. They're going to Walmart, or they're going to Toys R Us here in Canada, thankfully still, or EB Games or GameStop, right? Like that. Those are the places that you go when you want to buy a video game.
Yeah.
Or you very rarely would go into an independent game shop, and most of the ones that have survived on retro game sales. So it's like the older stuff that obviously you can't get through the digital means, and that EB and GameStop don't trade in, or they've diversified and they've brought in tabletop gaming, board gaming, stuff like that, collectible card games. So it's kind of the same thing. I don't think it's gonna be a death nail for the entire comic shop industry. But I do think that you're gonna see some of the older, less agile comic shops lose ground here, and eventually go away. And yeah, I do think that exactly what you said, like single issues are going to take a hit, and maybe it'll be the thing that wakes Marvel and DC up to the reality of the situation. But I mean, DC has actually been pretty good with their Earth One books. And other stuff kind of like that, in that same vein. They've tried going in that direction of like, these never had issues, they're just graphic novels. But I think for them, they put out so many single issues. It's such a big machine. And it's the boat analogy, right? A smaller boat is able to turn quickly, and a bigger boat, it takes a lot of time for it to turn. Marvel and DC are big boats, and it's going to take them a long time to really like pivot. But even Image, they're a pretty big boat too, and they're not really pivoting that much. They're still doing a lot of their single issue stuff. But some of the smaller publishers, one of our favorites, First Second, they don't do issues, right? Like I don't, or at least they don't do a lot of things that are issues. Yeah, so like those smaller, more agile publishers, I think, are going to be able to gain a lot of ground in the next few months, and Marvel and DC might get kind of left in the dust, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I actually think that less superhero comics is actually going to be a good thing for superhero comics, because there's a lot of really crappy stuff that comes out on a regular basis, because everybody's got to have a title. And if they could maybe sit back and take more of an approach like what they've done with the films and with their animated stuff, the industry will actually benefit. The cream will rise to the top, and it'll mean less people working, less artists, less writers working on Marvel and DC stuff. But hopefully that means that, if those people really want to continue to work in the industry and not pivot on their own into other industries, then hopefully they'll go independent routes, and they'll start creating new IPs, and that'll make the industry that much richer again, right? And you take everything that they've learned at Marvel and DC and go do the thing that they've always wanted to do, and hopefully that's not just a bunch of superhero copycat books. If you listen to the Pullbox podcast, you know how I feel about that stuff. But but hopefully I everybody finds kind of their niche and their place to belong in the industry. But I don't know, tough times ahead for comics. I think that's it's been tough times for a while. You say it's sort of on an upswing right now, and I think that Marvel and DC movies have a lot to do with that. But
Well, I don't think that Marvel and DC are necessarily on an upswing. I mean, they always hold the top spots anyway, just because they're the
Yeah.
biggest. But they have been stagnant for a while. But we're seeing more of a rise of the people exploring independent stuff.
yeah,
Publishers like First Second and Top Shelf and
I
Fantagraphics.
I would wager that's still a direct correlation with Marvel movies, because
Yeah,
Marvel movies have become the biggest industry in entertainment, aside from video games, which dwarf film revenues by a lot.
yeah,
It's the jump from comics to film. It's like film to video games. The video game
right.
industry is ridiculous. But yeah, I would wager that something like Captain America Civil War, right? Which is one of those ones that people went like, "Oh, wait, comic book movies aren't all popcorn whatever, right? Like, this is a little bit more serious. This is a little bit more of like a spy thriller. They can be other things."
Like Winter Soldier, you mean, right?
Yeah, sorry, Winter Soldier being the
Yeah.
first one. Yeah. Yeah,
Totally. Well, and it gave people permission
yeah,
to like comic books, I think.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it opened it up, right? So people went into
Yeah.
comic book stores and went, "I'm gonna pick up, I Winter Soldier. I'm gonna pick up the comic book." And then while they were there, the comic shop owner or employee was like, "Hey, if you like that, you should check out this other thing that's actually, that, but way cooler," right? Because that tends to be the line from a lot of people who work in comic book stores. I can attest to that because I was one of them. Yeah, so it's I think that there's a direct correlation. There's a knock-on effect from the popularity of the MCU films. That again, it's the rising tide sort of effect. But I don't know. We'll see. Let's wrap it up there because we've been going for an hour.
Yep.
Yep. But thank you, Curtis, for stopping by. And look, this is gonna go on for a while, so you'll be back. I know that you'll be back.
Yeah. Definitely.
By the end of this, I'll have exhausted everybody else, and it'll probably just end up being you and me talking a couple nights a week. But thank you to our live audience of, I think, two. I think it was Sherston and Jason back in the live audience again tonight. Thank you in particular to Jason, who is one of our Patreon producers.
Nice.
But we'll be back tomorrow night with my friend Victor, who did briefly technically have a podcast on the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. We'll talk about that tomorrow. We're going to talk about video games. That's the area of expertise for Victor and I. And that's where our cross section is. There's anime will probably also come up a little bit, but it's mostly going to be video games. I think we're going to talk a lot about Animal Crossing, in fact. And with that, I am going to sign us off and go play some Animal Crossing. So thank you guys for listening. Head to thunderquack.com to check out more great podcasts in the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. And if you want to support us, you know what? We're on YouTube. Do the YouTube thing. Smash that like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment below. Do all that stuff that you're supposed to do on YouTube, because this is a YouTube video as well as a podcast. Of course, if you are listening on podcast services, feel free to leave us a rating or a review on the podcast service, your choice. And you can also go to store.thunderquack.com, pick up some merch, and most importantly, you can head over to patreon.com/thunderquack, and you can kick in with your monthly pledge of support and get some cool rewards in the process. Thank you again, Curtis, for joining me tonight, and thank you to our live listeners. We'll be back tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard. Are we on Standard Time? We're on Standard Time now, right?
Yeah.
Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Keep reading comics.